Okay, this is Representative Wanda Fuller. How long have you been in the legislature? When did you first?
I ran in 1980, and I'm starting my 11th year.
My goodness. That's 5 elections, right?
5 elections, right.
And you've been in the House
Yes.
all of these elections. And you're a Republican?
Right.
And why did you affiliate with the Republican Party? Why are you a Republican?
My family was a Republican family in the state of Missouri, and I just registered as a Republican, and when I moved to Kansas, I have stayed a Republican.
That seems like the way it goes for most people.
I think so.
Can you describe your first election, or you were elected the first time and not appointed,
Yes.
weren't you?
My first election, actually, I made an attempt to run for the Sedgwick County Commission in 1978 and lost in the primary. And at the time, Senator Morris said to me, have you ever thought about running for the legislature? And I said, well, I hadn't. And he said, well, who's your state legislator? And he told me. And he said, well, if she ever decides to retire, you should then look at that. Well, 2 years later, she retired. It was Sharon Hess. And it was an open seat, so I ran in for an open seat in 1980 at a hard-fought primary, but I won by a pretty healthy margin, and then won in the general. I had a background of League of Women Voters, and I had run for a local position for the Wichita Citizens Participation Organization, which was a group that appropriated community development block grant funds.
I see. We've noticed there have been a lot of women from Wichita and from your area. That's interesting. Do you know why?
Right. I think one of the things is after I ran, we discovered about that time that women were becoming very electable, and there were an awful lot of I think the economy was a little rough at that time, and many men were not willing to leave their jobs for 3 months, but they were very supportive of having their wives run. And so we began to recruit, and I began recruiting probably in 1983. And I suppose because I'd been in the league and had been associated with women's groups, that I probably knew women better and was more comfortable asking them to run than probably recruiting men.
Well, we've noticed, we did a little statistical analysis of the women in the legislature, and we noticed that after 1975 there were more than 4. Prior to 1975 there had never been more than 4 at a time. Can you identify any reason with that year or anything that happened, since you obviously were kind of getting to be active at that time?
In 1974 was about the time I became active in the League of Women Voters, and I think that it was probably just the beginning of the awareness of women and politics, and they'd been working for men candidates, and all of a sudden we thought, why are we working for men candidates? We can have women be in public office. The biggest stumbling block was funding. And we still have a problem with women supporting women financially to run for public office. They'll tend to work on their campaigns, but they're not very good campaign contributors. So.
Well, then are you saying that you think it is harder for a woman to raise funds to finance her campaign?
I believe in the beginning that it is more difficult, unless they are a professional woman that is connected in the business or what I consider male community organizations. Because if you're a homemaker or a school teacher, I think it's difficult.
And after you once elected, you become the incumbent, and it's always considered easier for the incumbent.
Then after you're elected and you prove yourself, you become more attractive to political action committees to contribute.
Well, that's interesting. Were there any groups of people besides your League of Women Voters that you mentioned, other clubs? What other organizations or other people encouraged you to run and worked in your campaigns?
My church is a very politically active church, and so I had certainly great church support. The Citizen Participation Organization, of course, is a political structure, and several of our candidates out of Wichita were former citizen participation candidates.
That's interesting.
Right, and that was an elected office. It was a 4-year term. So that was a good base. And We had the Women's Political Caucus that gave campaign training workshops, which was
Oh, really?
an encouraging type.
Is this in Wichita you
Yes.
had this?
Mhm.
I see.
And it's still an active group.
When did it start?
I wasn't involved in the creation of that, but I took my first campaign workshop in the late 70s, so it may have been created in the mid.
That's
It may have been
interesting.
created about the time we were speaking of in the mid 70s.
It may have been an influence, and I just wasn't
And it
aware.
was, Democrat and Republicans.
It was, I see, both parties, so that would possibly be in it. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
Who else encouraged you to run?
My family.
Your family,
Yeah.
okay.
My husband at the time was very encouraging. His family was very involved in politics in Missouri. And so he kind of grew up in the political arena. And of course, I knew him as a young girl in Missouri. And I was always a little bit fascinated by politics. His family was in the legislature and the governor's office and on the Supreme Court.
I see. Well, did you know them? I mean, is that recently enough that you were...
Yes, I had met all of them that had served. And so there was a little excitement there, and I'd been to the state capitol.
I see.
So that was a very encouraging group, and very hard working as far as helping me get elected.
How did you run the first time? How did you campaign for office?
I did a grassroots campaign. I did my first campaign. I had very little money. I ran my first primary on $2,500.
Oh my goodness.
And just from good friends, $50, $5 contributions. My largest contribution was probably $100. And so we ran just a very personal, hand-addressed, door-to-door, couple of mailings, no TV, no radio, just a grassroots, door-to-door, person-to-person campaign.
Did the media endorse you? Or?
Yes. No, the media didn't endorse me in the primary, but I was endorsed in the general.
I see. Can you describe, you said there were many people. How many were in your primary race?
I had, you mean opponents? Okay. It was a two-way race on the Republican side and a two-way race on the Democrat side.
I see. So it was a vigorous...
It was a vigorous campaign
on both
parties.
Was your general election as vigorous?
My opponent, actually, I thought the wrong person probably won the primary. I consider the one that lost to be a stronger opponent, but for some reason he didn't make it. But I did work very hard in the general, ran the same kind of campaign. I spent twice as much money for that, and I was able to raise more money in the general. I think I spent around $5,000 for the first general. Same kind of campaign, door-to-door, handwritten addresses, a couple of mailings.
Now, you mentioned your husband's family. Can you tell me who was in the State House from his family?
In the Missouri State House, his cousin's husband, and of course his uncle and aunt. His uncle was in the legislature, and then he died while he was serving, and then his wife then finished the term, and they were the Hydes. And then the daughter paged, and then when she married, her husband then, who was a judge, became a judge, later served in the House of Representatives.
Both, all in Missouri.
Right, all in Missouri.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
And then he had an uncle that was the governor, and his brother was in the cabinet of President Hoover.
Oh my goodness.
But the only one I really knew were the ones that were in the legislature, and then I knew the man that was on the Supreme Court and was elected Chief Justice.
Did you campaign for any of them?
No, I didn't. I didn't campaign until I came to Kansas, and I think the first person I campaigned for was Bob Dole in the 70s.
That's interesting. Can you describe the district you represent a little bit? Has it changed? Has it this last election? I know they were redistricted.
No, not really. The district is probably mostly blue collar. Some more and more it's becoming white collar because it's expanding out into I'm on the edge of the city, so I'm getting some more white collar annexation. It's a very easy district to represent because there's not a lot of diversity. I don't have any special interest factions. I have mostly residential and a few small businesses.
Good. What part of Wichita do you?
Southeast.
The Southeast. Okay. What issues were important during your elections, during your first election and subsequent ones, to the people of the district, I mean?
At that time, probably funding for education was pretty important. We weren't involved in a lot of tax issues at the time. There wasn't a lot of unrest or discomfort about government at the time, as I recall. I sent out a questionnaire, and I got a lot back. I sent out about 6,000, and I got about, I think it was like 1,600 back, which was
That's
really
very
good.
good.
It was very good.
Yes.
And there didn't seem to be any particular interest or complaints at the time. That's why I say it's a very easy district to represent.
Well, that is unusual, especially if you did
There are a lot
that.
of young families that have kids in school, and there was some concern about funding.
Has it remained the same through all the elections?
Pretty much. I didn't get a lot of mail on the classification or reappraisal. There's
That's
not a lot of-
interesting.
I think a lot of the older homes knew theirs was going to go up, and a lot of the newer homes, their taxes were already pretty high, and they didn't increase.
Well, what have been the main issues facing the legislature during the 11 years you?
Well, I can recall when I was in the league, we thought some of the issues, we wanted reappraisal and classification. We felt like that we needed a water plan. All of these far-reaching things that I thought would never come to pass, and probably I feel that since in the 10 years I've been in the legislature, we have addressed what I consider some of the most major policy issues that probably a state could address. And I think that is dealing with the water plan, and with reappraisal and classification, regardless of what the outcome was. Major highway plan. We've done a lot in welfare reform. Children's issues, I think, have surfaced, which they didn't seem to have a voice for so many years. I think it's been very exciting. Those are just a few.
Major issues,
right?
Are there any of the issues that you would say are identified, or you would identify as women's issues?
I started out with working on some women's issues. In fact, a couple of bills that I had to do with abuse of women. I think the second or third year I was here, I introduced the marital rape bill, and it was very controversial. But I had gone to a neighborhood meeting, and someone had told me that they thought that was an issue, and I didn't have any idea that it would be passed. But I had sponsored that. Another woman's issue that I helped sponsor was a spousal abuse bill, and it was if you could arrest the abusing spouse based on probable cause before she had to press charges and before the person could ever be arrested, or he or she. And so those were probably, I consider, two pretty major issues. Another one that we've looked at that I wasn't directly involved in was health insurance coverage for mammograms. So I think there's been some very exciting things happening for women.
Do you think that other people see these as women's issues, or expect women to take a leadership in these areas?
I think that there was probably a lot of interest with men and women, but I think that the men seem to deal with a lot of issues directed, to business and that kind of thing, and that they just never really went that far to look at that issue. But I think it took probably the leadership of the women to get the background and do the research to lead the charge. And in most cases, we had excellent support from men, and in most cases there were many men's signatures on the bills as there were women.
Good. That's interesting. Well, how would you describe your position on these issues? And I don't like to put labels either on people, but this kind of helps in some ways to have you label yourself. Are you conservative or liberal or?
Oh, I consider myself to be progressive.
Okay.
I'm perceived to be, I think, somewhat liberal by the more conservative males, but I don't, when it comes to spending, I'm very selective. I don't think I'm a liberal spender, I'm a selective spender. But I consider to be very progressive. Another issue I worked on was removing juveniles from adult jails and lockups. And that I started working on that, and it seems like a lot of those issues I was kind of before my time.
Yes,
and, but that's happening now, and I was very involved in prison reform. And so those were pretty progressive, I think, at the time.
Well, as a freshman legislator, did you have a mentor, or did you have someone that you knew in the legislature that sort of helped show you around, find the right committee assignments and things?
I had a mentor in the campaign, and I had a mentor in the legislature, and it was Neil Whitaker. And in fact, he was instrumental in recruiting me, even though I knew that I wanted to run. He was one of the first people to contact me. And he helped me with committee selection and talked with the speaker, and I always appreciated that. And ever since then, I've always tried to be someone's mentor and give to them what was given to me.
Oh, that's interesting. What committees did you serve on?
When I first came, I had very good committee assignments. I had Federal and State Affairs and Education and Governmental Organization.
Are you still on those, or what?
No. Last year, for the last 4 years, I was on Tax and Appropriations and Judiciary. And now that I'm in leadership, I'm an assistant minority leader in the House. I'm on Appropriations and Legislative and Judicial reapportionment. And then there's a couple of other, like interstate cooperation and calendar printing.
So you really made a change in your assignments. That's kind of different than what seems to be the general rule for people. Okay, and I think you mentioned your leadership positions. Are there any other leadership positions besides what you hold now?
Kansas is a member of the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I'm on the Federal Budget and Taxation Committee and have been for about 6 years, and I'm the vice chairman of that committee. We meet a couple of times a year in Washington, D.C.
Position, Can you describe, we're asking everyone this question, the House power structure during the years that you were here, just sort of to set a baseline for what's going on this decade, I guess, sort of.
When I first started out, of course, all of the leadership was men, and usually if I had a good idea, sometimes you felt like you had to feed it through my mentor in some cases, because many times women weren't really considered, how shall I say, a part of the good old boy network. When I came in, I wasn't an attorney or I didn't have a major occupation that gave me a base. I came in as kind of a volunteer housewife category, if you will. And so I think I had to prove myself in a lot of the subject areas. Women were pretty much, there were no women chairs of any major committees. We had one chairman, and she was chair of the Elections Committee. And it was Belva Ott from Wichita. And we weren't really regarded to be experts in tax or commercial and financial or insurance. We were pretty much looked at as education and health and children's and women's issues. And so there was a struggle when I came in and started working on the women's issues. I thought, well, if I don't do it, no one else will. But yet I did not want to be labeled as a woman coming to deal with women's issues. So that's why I quickly moved from the social to the budget and tax and appropriations, because I felt that you could really really had more power there.
And you consciously tried to move
I tried to make a move to get the chairmanship of Federal and State Affairs my third term, and that was given to a veteran. And I mentioned it to the speaker at that time that I thought that we really need to make a conscious effort to get more women into leadership. The very next session, every woman in the House, with the exception of me, got a vice chairmanship.
How interesting.
And we still didn't have, I think we had one woman chair, and it was created, and it was computer and technology or something like that. But now that's all changed. We have, as you know, a woman that chairs the tax committee, a woman that chairs the economic development committee, a woman that chairs, and that's very exciting. And I think that we moved from the women's issues to all issues, and have developed ourselves to be experts in many other areas, and I think it's very exciting. No woman has ever held the assistant minority leader's position.
You're the first one.
I'm the first one. Donna Whiteman is the first woman to ever run and win the majority leader's office. And women didn't seek those offices, but now we are seeking them, and we are successful in them.
And that's true, that they didn't try for these.
And it's a very scary thing to do. I mean, you get in your car and you travel thousands of miles all around the state, and you're calling on mostly men, and so it's a very bold thing.
Well, it's definitely a trend. I mean, there seems to be a lot of energy in this. It's always, every year since '75, there's been an increase, a sort of a percentage increase. Have you participated in any formal coalitions or groups? Like last year, I know the newspaper made a big thing about the Women's Caucus, and was there such a thing? Did you participate?
We don't really have an official Women's Caucus in Kansas. Some states do, and we have different women that create different coalitions to do different things. And last year we formed kind of a ad hoc coalition on the floor, which evolved to be the Steel Magnolias. And we voted on some bills and some funding, and all in an afternoon, and it was a Republican women's coalition. But not all the women could agree, which is one of the problems when you try to create coalitions. But it has stayed. I think there's 8 remaining. There were 12, I believe, and I think there's 8 remaining. And we are getting together, and we are going to introduce many bills this session dealing with.
Is this just issues. Republican women you're talking
It's just
about?
Republican women in the Steel Magnolias.
And just in the House, not in the Senate.
Right, just in the House. And that's the only strong, unit that I know of. There may be others.
Well, I don't know.
We met together. We had one meeting of Republicans and Democrats to get acquainted.
Just to get acquainted, though.
We have not created an official caucus.
What are if you had to name 3 or 4 major debates, controversies, or victories that you've participated in since you've been here, what could you name? 2 or 3 or 4? That we've been successful in. Well, not necessarily. Could be defeats. Just the.
Well, probably one of the. I think I tend to start in the recent years and go back. Probably the bill that I carried on the floor that was the most disappointing defeat was. How do I want to say it? We were going to have restricted admissions to the universities, and it was a very close vote. I think it lost by just a few votes, and that was probably the last big banner that I've carried. Another issue that I argued very hard on was when we tried to change the classification amendment for the second time and bring inventories back on the tax rolls, and I was one of the people that argued successfully that not be done. The highway bill was a very big issue for Wichita, and I was the chairman of the Sedgwick County delegation at that time, and worked very hard with the delegation, was very vocal on that issue. Those are probably ones that really come to mind. We did a little prison reform that I worked on that literally reduced some sentences and gave good time credits that were favorable to reducing the prison population.
Okay, outside of these victories or defeats or whatever they were, do you have any other vivid memories of just plain experiences? Humorous, disastrous, whatever.
One of the things we used to do in the house that we no longer do was we used to have freshman awards. And usually about the time of the break, we would nominate freshmen for something clever they had said or done at the mic. And I can remember, of course, when I ran, I was 10 years younger, which made me 42. And I can remember when we had those freshman awards, the MCs dressed up in the coat and tails, top hat and tails, and the ties. And we made it look like a really big deal when we gave these awards out, but they were very hokey. And I can remember that Karen Griffiths, who was a very tall, attractive, blonde legislator, she would dress up in the tails and the tights, and she would escort people down to receive their awards. Well, one year, and the last year we did it, when Mike Hayden was speaker, I was one of the pages. Is that what you would call us? Sort of like a movie theater page. And I, at my age, managed to don one of these top hats and jackets and the tights and the heels, and it was quite a shock to everybody when they saw me walk out, and to myself, that I literally appeared on the House floor in this costume and ushered people down to get their awards, and to the comments like, my gosh, she has legs. And so that was probably one of the boldest things I ever did on the floor, and probably one of the most humorous things, which didn't really have anything to do with legislation, but it did. It was a light time, and there's probably some very fond memories of some of the freshman awards, and unfortunately we haven't continued that tradition.
When did that stop?
I was trying to remember. I think it was probably the last year that Ed Ross was in the legislature, because I think he and Marvin Barkus emceed it, but that may have been 85, 84, 85.
When you started, how many women were in the House with you?
I think we were counting it up, and I got the list over here. I think it's probably...
I'll let this go ahead.
Well, so
that sounds about right.
Yeah, because the year before I came in, there were 17, and then when I came in, quite a number of women then came in that year. So
probably 3 or 4 more each.
Just one more, I guess.
18.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are 35 in the House now?
Yes, 35.
So that's you've seen quite an increase.
Right. In fact, when I say it's almost tripled. Look at that since I came in.
I think that's interesting,
too.
Why, and